The first stories in this collection were submitted to me by subscribers. Story 1 by Alex Harper. I was raised under strict Native American beliefs by my great-grandmother. My family always disregarded her stories and warnings she gave us. She always told me specifically to never venture up north for some reason. I don't remember it exactly since she died when I was just a kid. Many years later, though, I completely forgot and, like the rest of my family, disregarded her warnings. I moved to Truman, Minnesota, to a farmhouse that I inherited from her. It was the very opposite of my hometown, very spaced out and in the middle of nowhere. Cornfields and pig farms for miles. Being 20 and an introvert, I enjoyed the much-needed silence from the cities. You'd think I'd be in heaven. My nerves, for some reason, were always on edge whenever I'd step out of the house. I felt as if something was keeping an eye on me. There's a small set of woods between my old farmhouse and a soybean field on the other side. It stretched all the way around the house. I only walked in the woods once, taking photos and getting an idea of the area. That's when I noticed the birds stopped chirping. The dead silence in the woods. I was getting uneasy and left before I could go any further. My 2 cats never stepped in the woods. They always stayed close to me as if they were sensing danger too. It was unlike them to act so paranoid. It triggered me to stress eat. A lot of strange occurrences would happen. My garden supplies would go missing. I'd hear thumping in the walls and my dog suddenly disappeared. I searched everywhere for her and kept checking shelters every few days whenever I'd go to town. It was getting so bad I'd have sleepless nights. I walked downstairs in the middle of the night to make myself a drink when the light sensors went off. Those lights were old, from the people before me. They don't just cut out because of a bug. Something in the light caught my eye. It was a big long white furry leg. My nerves were shocked, unable to register what it could have been. Timberwolves? Bears? No, they weren't in this area. I didn't want to go out like an idiot and get mauled by whatever was out there. I could hear my heartbeat in my head as I got my drink quickly. I suddenly heard meowing. It was exactly how my younger cat would meow if he'd get stuck somewhere. He was still a kitten after all. How did he get outside? I was about to get close to the door when I realized the cat sounds like it's coming out of an old, worn speaker. That wasn't my cat. He was lying on the floor, looking at me confused just as I was. I ran upstairs and didn't sleep again that night. That wasn't the last time I experienced anything. I had family over. We were going to have a nice dinner before they went back home. I never had any problems that day until my aunt said my kitten ran off. He must have got scared from the children constantly being up in his business. I ran out to the yard, checking from what I could see where he might be hiding. I heard meowing in the garage. When I was close to the corner of the house, I heard a dog barking. A familiar muffled bark. I thought my dog finally made it home. I turned the corner fast, about to shout for Roxy, when my body froze in its tracks. Standing at the edge of the woods was something massive and white, long arms and legs. It had to have been at least 10 feet tall. The face greyed and unclear to make out from the distance. I realized this thing was the same thing trying to lure me out the many nights before. We're on the blind side of my house. No one would know if I'd been killed. My legs wouldn't budge. The silence was deafening. It just stood there on all fours staring at me. I slowly backed away towards the corner. Before it could move any more, I ran back inside. Pale and on the verge of a heart attack, my family came and asked what was wrong. But I knew if I told them, I'd be seen as the crazy one in the family too. They were chatting like normal for the night, telling me about Grandma always saying weird things to me. It was bringing up memories I thought I'd forgotten. Long story short, I look like her. I should never go up north. That Wendigo haunts this land. We used to fend it off, but it was too stressful. It just kept getting stronger. She decided to leave the house to me because I am the only one that listened to her. I guess she hoped I'd find a way to get rid of it or prevent anyone from living there. It made sense. I decided to move out after my family left. As I was packing my stuff, the farmer came by to inform me my dog was found, but she was dying from some deep slashes on her body in his field. He put her out of her misery because of the loss of blood. He felt guilty about having to tell me because I was a young lady and seemed to really care for the dog. I was upset, but thanked him for at least helping her. I live back in the south currently, but in search of a shaman that is willing to travel and help me. So far, no such luck. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Any engagement really helps this channel to grow. Story 2 by Joe Leggett, known on Reddit as Popo Joe. I was a sheltered child. No crazy, scary or violent movies. Growing up in the late 80s and early 90s. I had a big imagination and started 3rd grade in Richmond, Virginia. My father was a struggling pilot and had our family move around the eastern US a lot. We had just moved from Bangor, Maine. My mother was a stay-at-home mum. At the time, I only had my sister as a sibling, and we were very poor. I remember we lived in a 4-building apartment complex with a large centre grassy field. I played along with a lot of other children who lived there and from down the street. One day, I noticed a small wooden box sticking out from the dirt. I pulled it out as my sister and friends came to see what I was doing. It was an old box, and inside we discovered 3 brass bells. The bells looked to be antiques with very strange markings around them. Me and my sister took one, some friends who were brothers took one, and I'm not sure who took the 3rd. I can't remember. It was almost 26 years ago. We played with these bells and rang them all day before we went back to our homes at dusk. That night was the first night where the strangeness began. I awoke on the shared mattress in me and my sister's room, which was just on the floor. I sat up in bed. A strange, soft blue light filled the room with a glow. Still dark, but present. I feel like I'm being watched. I see my sister still asleep on the other side of the mattress. Then I feel it. A tap on my back. I look over, expecting to see my parents or something. But instead, I see it. I see a small hooded figure with large black eyes staring at me. I'm scared stiff. This thing just stared at me, never blinking, and all I could think to do was shake my sister, barely making out the words, "Wake up! Wake up!" but she did not. So the only thing I could think to do was to break this thing's stare. I hid under the sheet. I was so afraid I passed out. A few weeks later, I was playing in my room, and my sister had the bell. We rang it as we played with our action figures as some part of our imaginary storyline. That night, I awoke again. Some blue, dull haze. And I could feel it. The visitor. I looked over, and there it was staring at me. But this time, I could see more of its face. Grey skin, it had no nose. It had a chevron of slits for a mouth and small holes for nostrils. Still hooded. I was terrified. And when I say terrified, I mean I felt the blood leave my skin, dread and paralyzed. I once again tried to wake up my sister as I stared at this thing. No response. So I did the next thing I could think of. I tried to talk to it. What do you want? I said with a shaky voice. It said nothing. Instead, it was like it was in my head and emitted a strong paralyzing signal, which all I could see was a kaleidoscope of light and an ear-splitting tone. I passed out. I woke up the next day, and my mind raced as to why I was seeing this thing, and my sister wasn't. And then at some point, I put together that I didn't start to see this thing until we found the bells. And after we rang it, it showed up. I told my sister never to play with the bell, and never to ring it by me again. I was unable to ask the other kids if they were having the same experience, because my father had lost his job and my family had to move back to Denison, Texas, to stay with my grandparents. The Denison-Pittsburgh area was always a nice place to be. I was born there, our families lived there, and it was the place we went for Christmas break. It was home, unlike the East Coast. One night, we were staying with my grandparents and my sister, mocking, said, "Guess what I brought?" holding up the bell. She knew it bothered me seeing it. Seeing the device I associated with summoning my visitor, which she thought was just my imagination. That night, I watched her play with her Beanie Babies, as I was watching Top Gun on VHS. My sister was ringing the dinner bell like a butler, as her dolls were getting ready for some banquet. The sound made my blood turn to ice. I asked my grandmother if I could sleep in her room instead of being in the downstairs guest bedroom. She agreed, not knowing why I was so persistent on sleeping on a floor instead of in a bed with down pillows and a comforter. "All the more room for me," my sister mocked. That night, I remember sleeping with a single pillow and a comforter at the foot of my grandparents' bed, waiting for it to show up. But it didn't. Instead, I just fell asleep. I awoke to a blood-curdling screaming coming from the guest bedroom. It was my sister. My grandparents jumped from their bed and raced down the stairs, leaving me alone. I knew what she saw. I knew the terror for her was real as well. They brought her into their room in a crying, sobbing ball. "You just had a bad dream. Sleep in the bed." As my grandmother tucked her in and my grandfather grudgingly walked back downstairs to sleep in the guest room. My sister cried herself to sleep that night. The next morning at breakfast, I asked her, "What did you see? Did you see the thing?" She looked up from her Fruity Pebbles, spoon shaking. "I saw two of them, a tall one and a small one." This made my heart drop. There were two of them, and I've only seen the small one. My sister apologized and told me she now believed everything I was telling her. My sister hid the bell in a shoebox for years up in a closet. Me and my sister thought that what we were seeing mostly resembled aliens. But why come with a ring of the bell? Were they something else entirely? Years went by and we got older. We were 11 and 12 now. My grandparents lived at a dead-end street which bordered a large drainage ditch 12 to 15 foot deep and some thick woods which goes back a mile or so. It was Christmas break and me and my sister were playing with a neighbour friend, let's call him Blaine for privacy reasons, who was a few years older than us. We were playing in the street. I saw a triangular craft come from above the trees, a large green opal light in the centre, with small white lights along the side. No noise came from it. It hovered over a telephone pole for what seemed like a minute. I wasn't scared. In fact, I was fascinated. Years of pondering alien life since my first encounter had made me more curious in my older age than when I was much younger. My sister and Blaine took one look at it and ran out to the front door yelling for my grandmother to come out and look. She walked out and said for everyone to come inside. I kept looking at the craft. "Get inside the house now," she yelled. "It's just a helicopter." I knew this was no helicopter. I had every Desert Storm micro machine toy and knew every piece of US military hardware. It was a thing I was obsessed with at the time. The craft began to accelerate up and into the sky, becoming just a small star. And then, nothing. I was left in the street in awe. I looked back at my sister and Blaine, and they looked at me like I was crazy. Not a week later, same street, about the same time, dusk. We were all playing when a massive bright light emitted from out the trees. So bright, it hurt the skin with a burning sensation. We all ran toward the front door to get in and away from the light. When the light retreated back into the forest, we looked back to see what caused it, and we saw a greenish-blue light fly up into the sky and out of sight. We all looked at each other, knowing it was probably something to do with the UFOs we saw the week prior. I tell you that to tell you this. My dad landed a cushy gig in San Antonio, Texas, and we as a family moved out there. I was 13 and my sister was 12. We started school and became good friends with a pair of Korean sisters. Their dad was in the Air Force. Me and my sister had become fascinated with UFOs and the paranormal. We asked the sisters if their dad ever worked at Area 51. I know, like they would be able to tell us. They were just as curious as we were about the supernatural. My sister and I decided to tell them about the haunted bell we had. They were very skeptical at first with our story. My sister told them she would bring them the bell the next morning to the bus stop before school. To my horror, my sister still had the bell. It had been years since I had seen it. She carefully handed the bell to the sisters and told them, "All you've got to do is ring it." They laughed as we got on the bus. The next morning, the girls ran up to us and threw the bell at me. "Get that thing away from us." I wanted a control group for their experience, so me and my sister failed to describe what the visitors looked like. Instead, we told them it looked like a shadow. We truly wanted to know if either of us was crazy. It woke us up, trying to come through our window. "What did it look like?" I said. "It was grey and had big black eyes." Me and my sister just looked at each other. We knew we weren't the only ones to describe the same thing. One night, my neighbour friend and I were up late at his house playing Sega Dreamcast. It was about 3 a.m. when he looks out his bedroom window and says, "Hey, There's someone in your room. There's a blue light coming from inside your room. I look at him and say, I don't have anything that glows blue in my room. I get up from the floor to look out the window, and I see the same hazy blue light from my childhood coming through my bedroom window. That's weird, I said, as I sat back down, my nerves on edge. I didn't want to tell my friend because he didn't believe in such things and would call me nuts if I told him about my visitor. Is it still coming at night without me knowing? I thought. Years went by, and now I'm 16. I learned about the phenomenon of night terrors because I have them regularly now. It crosses my mind that maybe, when I was younger, I was just having night terrors when I saw the visitor. But no, they are much too different. 1. I'm awake, and I can move and hide the second I feel I am awake. But when I get night terrors, I cannot move, and see nothing, but feel a presence in the room. No, I was not having night terrors. Besides, I'm not the only one to see this thing. I awoke one night in my room. The same blue light danced through the darkness. I could feel it looking at me. I'd had enough. Was this all real, or just my infectious imagination? I sat up in my bed and looked over. There it was. Same dark hooded figure, and this time I can see its face real good. I can see its skin shine from the blue light, almost like it was wet. I felt I had to know if it was real or not. So, I knocked on its forehead, like if you were lightly knocking on someone's front door. I felt its skin as it leaped back, almost in amazement that I had touched it. I sat there, frozen, thinking, yes, this thing is real. I did what anyone would probably do in that situation. I hid under the covers like a child. And then it came. The emitting of a high frequency filled my mind with a kaleidoscope of colors. I screamed aloud as it screamed inside my mind. I passed out. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. My parents asked me what I was dreaming. They had not checked on me, but only heard me screaming in my room. I said, yeah, just a bad dream. My sister looked at me knowing full well what I saw. I asked her if she had rung the bell. I hadn't seen it in years. She said no. She had lost it in our most recent move. I wonder if it was just paying me one last visit. We never told our parents until we were much older. They just smirked and asked us what drugs we were experimenting with. I said, at 10 years old? But whatever. This is me and my sister's story. Our friend Blaine still works for the city of Denison, and he always tells me when I see him, hey, remember when we saw that UFO? Yes, I say. How can I forget? I wonder whatever happened to the other kids who took the other bells. Are they alive? Are they sane? Or did anything ever happen to them? I ask you to post this in the hope to find out what did happen to those kids, and if anyone has had any similar experiences. To this day, I don't really know what the visitor really was. The remaining stories in this video are from Reddit. Story 3 by Reddit user Girl with Many Names. My great-grandmother owned 20 acres in rural Kentucky. She left 14 acres to my aunt, R, and 14 acres to my gram. My gram left her land and her house to my husband and I. My experience actually happened before my husband and I ever met. About 8 years ago, I was out in the woods behind our house with my ex-boyfriend and my friend. We were exploring and really just hanging out. Sometime during our escapade, I split from them and went off on my own. I know the land pretty well as I grew up here, so I headed for a clearing I thought would be nice to relax in. The clearing in question is pretty close to the edge of the woods, and you can even make out the back of my barn if you look hard enough. When I cleared the trees, I immediately felt like I was being watched. It was so sudden and so intense, I actually stopped in my tracks. Some part of my mind was in control, but it didn't feel like me, if that makes sense. The part that was in control told me to turn around, so I'd face the way I just came, slowly, and not make a sound. When I turned, I didn't see anything right away, just the forest I came out of, and what looked like a downed tree off to the left. But my head told me to move slowly out of the woods. In order to do that, I'd have to pass the downed tree, as the path out of the woods runs that way. For some reason, I really didn't want to do this. My body started moving for me, and I made my way down the path, towards the tree, keeping my eye on it. But the closer I got, the less tree-like it looked. Finally, I was in front of it, about 10 feet away. It was not a tree. It was an impossible large wolf-like creature, and it was staring right at me. It was lying down with its head on its paws, and it was really massive. I wanted to scream and run, but my mind wouldn't let me. It told me to be as quiet and slow as I could. I stared that thing down for what felt like 30 minutes, but was really about 30 seconds. Even still, I got a great look at it. It was dark brown, as big as a black bear, and really still. Its eyes followed me as I moved, but that was all that moved. I know it wasn't a bear, because I know the difference between a bear and a canine. I cleared the woods and immediately ran for my house, screaming for my ex and my friend. Weirdly enough, I didn't tell them what I saw, and didn't even want to. Not because it sounds crazy, but because I just didn't think I should. 5 years later, so 3 years ago, I was hanging out with my cousin, and I had the sudden urge to tell her what happened. She grew up around those woods too, so she knows where the clearing is. I thought she wouldn't believe me, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up straight while I was explaining the thing, and I knew at that point she'd seen it too. She told me that when she was young, she was playing down by the barn with her siblings and my other cousins, and my aunt, R, called them for dinner. My other cousins went up to my aunt's house, but my other cousins stayed to play. She was throwing rocks at the trees when she saw the same wolf come running out of the woods at her. She said it was fast enough to get from the wood line to the barn, about 200 feet, by the time she got to the orchard, which is 20 feet from the barn. She ran to my aunt's house and never breathed a word of what she saw. The older she got, the more convinced she became that it had been a dream. I haven't been back to that clearing since that day, and my cousin's story explains why I never saw her go into the woods when I was young. My sister hates it here because she claims she feels watched. Everyone but me thinks she's ridiculous. My cousin theorized that it's a type of guardian spirit. It was angry with her for throwing rocks at the trees, and that's why it was aggressive with her. It didn't attack or chase me because I wasn't harming anything. I'm not sure, but that's the best explanation we have, as no one but us knows about it. I'm telling my story for the first time to you guys, honestly, just so maybe someone could explain it for me. The weirdest thing of all is that my cousin swears she remembers it having large purple-coloured eyes that burned into her. But I don't remember what its eyes looked like. I stared into those eyes for 30 whole seconds, and to this day I can't remember what they looked like. Only that they followed my movement. I was 100% sober that day, and I do not have a history of hallucinations or delusions. In fact, I rated high for logical thinking and rational thought when I was evaluated. Story 4. By Reddit user I Just Be Chillaxing. I have a hard time telling this story because I didn't want to believe that these things exist, that there were people who can do impossible things, and that saying, "the freaks come out at night," wasn't just a song. It was an early Saturday morning around 3 a.m. I was leaving a friend's house because I didn't like to sleep in anyone's bed but my own. Hindsight, I really wish I would have stayed the night. As soon as my car hit the pavement, I noticed that everything was silent. Not regular silent, but like in the woods silent when a predator is around and all the animals and bugs go quiet. But this was the city. Streets were never usually this empty. But I saw nothing. No homeless people, no other cars. It was just me. It was so quiet I could hear the streetlights tick when they changed from red to green. But it didn't alarm me because I was just tired and ready to go to bed. I was about a block from my apartment waiting for a light to change when I noticed this jogger waiting at the crossing intersection. He was a thin man, looked completely normal, dark hair with a reflecting jogger suit on. He was doing the run-in-place thing that joggers do when they wait at crosswalks. The light changes to signal for me to go, but as I turn, I notice that the jogger is stepping out onto the street. He begins to contort his body in ways that his bones appear to break. His legs start to bow out like a creature. It was like he transformed as I began to turn down the street, and he started sprinting directly for my car. It had its mouth open and his teeth gnawing at me. The eyes looked impossibly big and predatory. Before he or it could reach the car, I accelerated and sped down the street. It took all the courage in the world for me to look in my rearview mirror. When I did, the thing was standing in the middle of the road, staring at me as I drove away. I made it home to my sister, who was my roommate at the time, crying and shaking like I had escaped something. She refuses to let me tell the story because she saw the fear in my eyes. She just wants me to be like the woman I was before I saw it, believing in only things that you can see. I'm just wondering if anyone else in California has seen this type of activity before. Story 5. By Reddit user OKPen3125. I just want to start this off by saying that this happened when I was a young teen, so the details may be slightly off, but I'll do my best. I'm not sure if I'm looking for answers or for someone to hear my experience. If you have any explanation, I'm happy to hear it in the comments. So this happened when I was around 14 or 15. It was around midday, and me and an old friend were hanging out in my childhood bedroom, and we happened to be talking about fears and nightmares. I was telling her that I get freaked out by the cupboards above my wardrobe. My wardrobe was built into the wall with small but wide cupboards above. After asking me why it would freak me out so much, I began to explain that it was because I always felt like I was being watched from the cupboard on the right. I told her how once I had a dream that something or someone lived in there and would come down to observe me in bed and would occasionally sit on my chest. I would usually wake up finding it hard to breathe. I told her how the person was tall and humanoid, but had an animalistic behavior. And the most terrifying detail? It had no features, No eyes, no mouth, slits for nostrils and weirdly human ears. Some sort of aquatic-like skin creature. After telling her this, I was led on my bed at this time, of which faced in the direction of the cupboard. My eyes were almost immediately drawn to the cupboard. And that's when an inhuman wave of dread and fear washed over me. I started seeing it. The cupboard doors were creaking open, and it began to almost spider-walk down the floor before pouncing on my chest. And that's when I realized I was crying. Not a dramatic stream of tears, just silent droplets running down my cheeks. One minute I was drowning in fear. The next, everything was fine. My friend now grabbing my shoulders, worry in her eyes. Confused, I glanced back over to the cupboard. It was shut, with no sign it was ever open. I asked countless times if she had seen what happened, but to her, it looked like I started having a panic attack. I had forgotten about it for a while, pushing it to the back of my mind like all the other bad memories. It's only until recently, when I felt a similar feeling, that I remembered. Just to disclaim, I have never hallucinated before, and have no record of ever doing so. I was perfectly awake, and apart from depression and anxiety, I have no other mental illnesses. Like I said earlier, I'm not really looking for answers, but if anyone can explain, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredeverall.com. I'm getting closer to my next milestone of 100,000 subscribers. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. It'll probably be 3 hours of Wendigo stories, as you guys seem to love those the most. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please keep helping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal, link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. Or head over to Audible, where I have a book, Punch by J.L. Park, that I narrated. Thanks again for watching.